The night did not feel electric. It felt restrained. The arena was full, the lights bright, the ring centered like it always is, but something in the air felt tight, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The matches before the main segment were clean, professional, almost too smooth. Commentary tried to keep rhythm, but there was a hesitation between sentences, a slight lag that didn't belong on a live broadcast. The crowd reacted when prompted, yet the noise rose and fell unevenly, like waves interrupted by an unseen force. Rumors had been circling all week. Not the loud, obvious kind that trend and disappear within hours, but the quiet ones that move through locker rooms and production corridors. A name whispered without context, a contract signed without announcement, staff members refusing to confirm or deny anything. By the time the final segment approached, even the most seasoned voices at ringside sounded careful. Words were chosen slowly. Jokes didn't land. There was an undercurrent of uncertainty that couldn't be scripted away. In the back, wrestlers who weren't booked for the segment had stopped changing. Some stood near the monitors, arms folded tightly across their chests. Others leaned against metal lockers, pretending not to care. They had heard the same whispers. They knew what it could mean. The return wasn't framed as a celebration. It wasn't nostalgia. It was disruption. The ring announcer stepped forward with composure that felt rehearsed but fragile. The crowd quieted in anticipation, but it wasn't excitement driving the silence. It was caution. People leaned forward instead of jumping up. Phones were raised, but not triumphantly. The cameras scanned faces that looked puzzled rather than thrilled. Then the lights dimmed slightly, not dramatically, just enough to shift the temperature of the room. The Titantron flickered without immediately revealing anything, a static image. No music at first. Just a low, mechanical hum from the sound system adjusting to something unfamiliar. Commentary paused entirely. A single spotlight hit the entrance ramp, illuminating nothing but empty space. The audience waited for the cue they were trained to expect. It didn't come. Seconds stretched. A few scattered cheers tried to start, but they died almost instantly. The unease thickened, and then her name appeared. No explosion of sound. No triumphant anthem. Just stark white letters across a dark screen. Jade Cargill. The reaction wasn't unified. Some gasped, some clapped hesitantly, others fell silent. The silence was louder, because everyone understood something at the same time. This wasn't a comeback, it was a warning. Her music finally began, but it wasn't mixed for celebration. It rolled out slowly, heavy bass, vibrating through the arena floor. Each step she took onto the stage felt deliberate, almost measured against the rhythm of the crowd's heartbeat. Jade Cargill didn't rush. She didn't gesture. She didn't feed off the audience. She stood at the top of the ramp as if she owned the structure beneath her feet. The spotlight revealed a figure that looked sharper than memory allowed. She had always been physically imposing, but tonight there was something colder in her posture. Her shoulders were squared, chin slightly lowered, eyes fixed on the ring without blinking. No smile, no smirk, no exaggerated confidence. Just presence. Commentary tried to regain control, but their voices overlapped awkwardly. One called it shocking, another called it unexpected. A third voice stopped mid-sentence, as if realizing that no word felt appropriate. The crowd began to divide in real time. A section near the entrance erupted with cheers, chanting her name. Across the arena, a pocket of fans stood still, arms crossed, watching like witnesses to something dangerous. She began her walk. Each step down the ramp felt slow enough to count. The camera couldn't make her move faster. The ring seemed smaller with every stride she took. Inside the ropes, the scheduled competitors had frozen. One leaned against the turnbuckle, jaw tight. The other paced in a tight circle, eyes locked on the approaching figure. Jade didn't look at them. She didn't look at anyone. Halfway down the ramp, the music lowered, almost fading into the background. The only clear sound was the friction of her boots against metal and the faint murmur of thousands trying to decide how to feel. This wasn't hero worship. It wasn't villainous heat. It was uncertainty bordering on fear. When she reached ringside, she paused. Not for effect, for ownership. She placed one hand on the apron and pulled herself up with effortless control. The ropes dipped slightly as she stepped through them, and suddenly the ring no longer felt like neutral territory. It felt occupied. One of the competitors attempted to speak, but whatever words were forming disappeared under Jade's stare. She didn't shout, she didn't strike immediately. She simply stood in the center of the ring, breathing evenly, shoulders rising and falling with calm precision. The audience grew quieter, because dominance doesn't always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it arrives in silence and dares anyone to challenge it, and no one moved. The first motion came without theatrics. Jade stepped forward, and the closest competitor instinctively stepped back. That small retreat shifted the emotional balance of the entire building. It wasn't a dramatic attack that stunned the audience. It was the visible surrender in another athlete's body language. Confidence evaporated in real time. When contact finally happened, it was swift and controlled. No wild swings, no chaotic flurry. Jade moved with clinical efficiency, every strike precise, every movement calculated. The The crowd reacted in fragmented bursts, some screaming approval, others gasping in discomfort. There was no unified chant, no shared rhythm, just shock rippling through sections of the arena in uneven waves. The second competitor attempted to intervene, but hesitation cost them. A single counter shifted momentum entirely. The sound of impact echoed sharply, and suddenly both scheduled performers were down. Not theatrically sprawled, not selling for spectacle, but visibly shaken. Jade didn't celebrate. She didn't raise her arms. She stood over them, breathing steady, eyes scanning the arena as if assessing territory rather than basking in dominance. Commentary had fallen nearly silent again. When words returned, they were softer, uncertain. Questions replaced declarations. What does this mean? Why now? Who approved this? The tone wasn't hype, it was damage control disguised as analysis. Outside the ring, officials hesitated at the edge of the ramp. No one rushed in, no one signaled security immediately. It was as if even authority needed a second to process what had just unfolded. Jade leaned against the ropes, not exhausted, not emotional, just present. Her gaze drifted toward the hard camera, and for a brief second, the audience felt seen in a way that wasn't comforting. The cheers had dulled. Even the loudest supporters seemed unsure whether to continue celebrating. This wasn't a triumphant return narrative. It felt disruptive. It felt unsanctioned in spirit, even if it had been approved on paper. When she finally exited the ring, she did so without looking back at the fallen competitors. The music resumed faintly, but it felt secondary to the weight of what had already happened. Each step up the ramp was slower than before, as if she understood that the real impact wasn't physical. It was psychological. Backstage, monitors went dark one by one as production teams scrambled to recalibrate. Wrestlers exchanged looks that didn't need explanation. A hierarchy had shifted in less than 10 minutes, and no one had been ready for how icily it happened. The locker room atmosphere changed immediately. Conversations that once revolved around match placement and storyline progression shifted toward survival and strategy. Veterans who had built reputations on resilience now found themselves reassessing their positioning. Younger talent whispered about opportunities but spoke with caution, aware that proximity to power can be as dangerous as distance from it. Interviews scheduled for after the show were abruptly replaced. Instead of discussing victories or rivalries, reporters asked about Jade. Some wrestlers deflected. Others admitted unease. No one dismissed her presence. The honesty in their eyes betrayed something deeper than storyline tension. It was professional anxiety. Authority figures faced questions they hadn't anticipated. Why wasn't this announced? Why were the competitors left unprepared? Was this strategic or reactive? Corporate statements attempted to frame the return as a landmark moment, but even polished language couldn't erase the visual memory of two top performers lying stunned in the ring. Media outlets amplified the footage within minutes. Social platforms fractured into debates. Supporters praised her dominance, calling it necessary disruption. Critics questioned the ethics of the setup. Analysts speculated about internal power struggles. Headlines used words like takeover, shockwave, recalibration. At home, families of wrestlers watched with mixed emotions. Pride in their loved ones collided with fear for their safety and careers. Partners sent texts asking if everything was okay. Parents replayed the clip more than once, trying to measure risk through a screen. Jade herself remained largely silent. A brief backstage comment acknowledged no one directly. She didn't justify her actions. She didn't insult anyone. She simply stated that she was done waiting. Those 4 words echoed louder than any entrance theme. Done waiting, it implied history. It implied frustration. It implied a threshold crossed quietly long before tonight. The pressure mounted quickly. Expectations inflated overnight. Every future appearance would now carry comparison to this moment. Every opponent would measure themselves against what they had witnessed. The locker room wasn't just reacting to strength, it was reacting to inevitability. And inevitability changes how people sleep at night. In the days that followed, the replay circulated endlessly. Not just the strikes or the impact, but the walk, the silence, the pause before stepping into the ring. Analysts slowed the footage to study posture and expression, searching for hidden meaning. Fans argued over intent. Was it a statement against management? A message to the division? A personal reckoning disguised as competition? Inside the company, schedules were rewritten. Creative meetings grew longer and more guarded. Wrestlers trained harder, not publicly admitting why. No one wanted to be the next example. Even those who admired her discipline felt the weight of comparison settling onto their shoulders. Jade's family faced its own version of the spotlight. Interviews were requested. Comment sections flooded with opinion. Support mixed with scrutiny. Pride mixed with pressure. Being dominant on screen carries consequences off it. The image of control becomes a standard that must be maintained. And that is where the real cost begins. Because dominance isolates, peers become challengers. Allies become observers. Every handshake feels like evaluation. Every silence feels loaded. The higher you stand, the fewer people can stand beside you without questioning their own footing. The company capitalized on the momentum. Of course, promotions highlighted her presence. Graphics framed her as transformative. But beneath the marketing, there was a subtle recalibration of power. Decisions were no longer made with comfort. They were made with caution. What happened that night wasn't just a return. It was exposure. Exposure of vulnerabilities within a roster. Exposure of assumptions about hierarchy. Exposure of how quickly perception can shift. Jade Cargill didn't just reappear. She altered equilibrium. And equilibrium, once disturbed, rarely returns unchanged. As weeks pass, the question lingers not about whether she can dominate again, but about what that dominance will demand from everyone involved. From opponents forced to rise or fall. From executives balancing risk and reward. From a woman carrying the weight of expectation heavier than any championship. The arena lights will dim again. Music will play again. Someone else will walk down that ramp. But the memory of that entrance remains suspended in the air, unresolved. Because the most unsettling part wasn't the destruction. It was how prepared she looked for a future that no one else had planned for. And if she was that ready, then what is she preparing for now?